we had an issue the other day that kind of cropped up, and haven't really run across it before. But as you get close to a closing, sometimes things go wrong with the mechanics of the house. And your seller might think to themselves, hey, you know what? The hot water heater just died. I better get the hot water replaced. Well, if you're going to get anything mechanical replaced on the house, you need to inform the buyer of this change. Now, you would think that they'd be happy that they're getting a brand new hot water heater. But what the seller did in this situation was they changed it from gas to electric. They ripped out all the gas piping and put in an electric hot water heater from Home Depot that was like $400. The only reason that I can think that they would do that would be because it was cheaper. And now the buyers have moved into the house, and the hot water is not sufficient to run the house. So now we've got kind of a mess on our hands with this situation, because when they did the walkthrough, nobody told them about the hot water heater had been replaced, and they didn't notice. So now we've got a little issue. But the point is this, is that when you're getting your listing, okay, it's very, very important to go through every little idiosyncrasy of that listing and make sure that you talk to your sellers and you explain to them that if there's anything that a material change in the property between now and the time you close, that has to be disclosed to the buyer. So make sure you take care of that. Any questions on that? Because that's kind of a tricky one. And you know, we had talked about this last week at training, but be very, very meticulous in terms of what is included and what is excluded. All right, so when people say to you, oh yeah, the washer dryer is included, do you mean this washer dryer or the washer dryer that's in the basement? All these kind of things crop up a lot of times at the closing, and things are missing. Washer dryers are missing, refrigerators are missing. There's just a million things that can go wrong. And if you go to that closing and you're fighting about little stupid things like this, it's going to leave a sour taste in their mouth. They're going to put a lousy review on Angie's List for you. And while we're talking about Angie's List, the sales rep at Angie's List called me the other day and goes, have you seen all the reviews on Success Real Estate? And I said, geez, you know, I really haven't. So I went on to Angie's List. And it's not just Angie's List. It's Yelp, it's Trulia. All these reviews are popping up. And I'd say that, and I think that Christine would agree with me, that what you do in terms of the course of your activities with your listing period is going to reflect a lot of times on what happens in the reviews that you get at the very end. Now, some may be solicited by you. Others, where it goes wrong, they might decide all on their own to put a little Yelp review for you, which is going to be very challenging to overcome, especially if there's only one or two reviews and one of them is lousy. So you've really got to bring up your game in terms of every aspect of your job, because people are going to be taking a hard look at you and they're going to be posting it online. And I went on to Angie's List the other day, and there was a couple good reviews. And what I'm going to do is there's an opportunity for me as the company to respond to the reviews. And you know, whether it's a good response, a good review that you get, or a bad review that you get, I'm going to make a comment on it and say, hey, thank you for the review. That was very kind of you. So-and-so is a terrific person. We're really glad to have him or her in the company. And if it was poor, then I'm going to say, gee, I'm sorry you had that experience, and make some kind of excuse to some way, shape, or form to try to get around it. All right. Anyway, what we're going to talk about today is the floodplain issues. And before Jim comes up, let me just say this, my little 2 cents on the floodplain zone. I'm glad you're all here because the floodplain issue is a huge, huge issue. And it is an absolute certainty that if you screw this up and you don't find out that it's in a floodplain zone, and people buy it, and then suddenly they find out it's in a floodplain zone, you're going to get a 93A, okay, because you did not do your due diligence and check to see if it's in a floodplain zone. And I will throw myself under the bus because I got 2 listings in Braintree over the past couple months. Never even occurred to me that Braintree, you could have floodplain zone. But lo and behold, both these properties were in a floodplain zone. So it was shocking for me, and I felt a little, stupid, quite frankly, because it didn't occur to me, and I should have gone down to town hall and talked to the planning department and said, hey, I'm checking on this property, and is it in a floodplain zone? And they would have said, yes, it is, or no, it's not. Okay, so it's something that you absolutely positively have to know. All right, and with that, I'm going to introduce Jim Cantwell. He's the state rep for Marshfield and Situate, and he is on the front lines, and I mean the front lines of the floodplain issue. So, warm welcome to Jim Cantwell.
Steve, thank you very much, and it's actually a place for the water. But as Steve would tell you, Steve's also been in the front lines that says, I'll explain just in a moment. First of all, I have the greatest job. Now, where can I move, by the way?
Nowhere.
We're being videoed.
So I have
to say right here, I have the greatest job because from A to Z, every day we get to work on something interesting. A couple of years ago, from A, we fought with insurance companies to make sure that they would cover children who had autism, to force that they would have to pay for services for really young children. We're doing zoning reform issues, everything in between. It's just the greatest job. And I get to do it in large measure because Steve supports me all the time. My office is actually here. So if you guys ever want to talk about any issues in your lives, I do. I just was meeting with some folks before on some issues. We do office hours here virtually anytime people call. But Steve, I appreciate the opportunity to come and I rent downstairs, so I get to be in the same location as all of you. Let me talk about the flood insurance. The program, the National Flood Insurance Program, it has been one of the major success stories for the federal government. From 1968, when it started, the federal government said, we need to help people who are going to live not just along the coast. Steve, you just mentioned Braintree, but it's any location where there may be a river, maybe a pond or the like, where there could be flooding. And the reason why it was a major success story is from 1968 when it started, the federal government said, we want to encourage home ownership. We're going to make sure, since there could be very large rates for people to have to pay for flood insurance, the federal government said, we will underwrite the risk. And what they've done since 68 is the federal government said, if there are losses, we can cover those losses, but we'll allow the private, come right over here too, there's a seat over here, would allow private industry to do as a partnership that private insurers would be the ones who collect the premiums, we underwrite the risk. From 1968 right up until Hurricane, it was Katrina and Sandy back to back, those 10-year period, guys. It turned a $10 billion profit. We would pay in, people here in Massachusetts would pay rates, and if people had losses in New Orleans, we helped cover them. People in California paid, and we had some losses that covered them. Very successful until Sandy. And at that point in time, federal government said, oh my God, but we have over a $28 billion deficit. We need to do something about it. Not to bicker of a lot of the things, the $10 billion in profit, by the way, instead of the federal government putting it, as an insurance company would, into a separate account and letting it collect interest, what they do? It went to the general fund. They spent it, right? So that's why the losses were exaggerated. But the bottom line is we were taking some losses. So the federal government decided they were going to change the way the law was written for the National Flood Insurance Program, and B, what they were going to do about mapping, which is, I think, what a lot of people want to talk about today. But I want to give you a full overview because I'm more the policy guy. I will extend my knowledge a little bit to answer some insurance questions. I'm not an insurance person, but I do want to tell you as far as what happened then. What did the federal government do? First of all, there was one law called the Biggert Waters Act that passed in 2003. And the federal government, their goal overall was to make sure that rates for insurance were going to go to what they call actuarial rate, which is basically what they said it would cost without a subsidy from the federal government. What would those costs be out on the free market? They eliminated grandfathering for a whole lot of properties, which is important to our area because we have older homes. They did what was called a sales trigger. Many of you may have come across this. So that when a home sold, immediately you'd start paying the highest possible rates. Because they had this demand of making funds up pretty quickly, we had people in Situate. I represent two towns, Marshfield and Situate, which I love to say is the Irish Riviera, by the way. That's not a selling point. But then we had people out in Lighthouse Point in Situate. Any of you had listings out there? Lighthouse Point? All right, if you haven't, for folks with Lighthouse Point, we had people who had bills for 1 year of flood insurance that they got a bill for $68,000. And as you all know, well, what's the coverage limit if you have a loss? 250,000. So imagine, if you got that bill, what it would do to folks. So here's the first part of my presentation is how the little guys made a big difference, because we said this is outrageous. We had Congressman Senator Markey come to Marshfield, Senator Warren, Congressman Keating, Congressman Lynch. The first meeting we had, Steve was there. We wanted to make sure we had experts in every field to speak. So Steve led off, he and Carol Conway, and talked about saying, listen, if you allow this act to go as it was written and passed, it was passed, by the way, if we don't amend it, what do you think will happen to property values? Steve said we had analysis, property values could have dropped 75, 80%, and more. We had people, Joe Norton from Situate is a banker. We had him come in and present and say, if people get those types of bills, what do you think they do with their mortgage? Realistically, you got a bill for $68,000, you had $250,000, not going to pay. So he was saying you're going to trigger an entire foreclosure crisis. A friend of mine down the street, Andy Wenning, did insurance. He talked about the complexities for how you try to write these policies. We had our police, fire, teachers at a panel, and they said, what do you think happens to tax revenues if people walk away from their homes? We'll all be drying up. We won't be able to afford. Our whole quality of life in Marshfield and Situate was largely jeopardized. And the example, actually, we met at Haddad's. How many of you have gone to Haddad's for dinner? Right? I don't know if any of you would know the story. What Haddad's did, the new Haddad's, they spent $3.3 million to improve their building. They moved it back. They lifted it up. When they were doing it, they had loans with the federal government through the Small Business Administration. They were told, you need to have your property at elevation 11 in order to meet all of our FEMA guidelines and save some money. They said, you know what, we're going to do better than that. We're going to go to elevation 13, so we'll be out of the flood areas. We won't have to pay flood insurance. So they did that, put all their money in. 6 months later, FEMA came back and said, hey, by the way, we're rewriting your maps, which I'll get to in a second. And they said, you're now elevation 16, you're going to have to pay $25,000 a year for your flood insurance. And they said, by the way, in this act that we just did, eliminated grandfathering. So all of that, those are the things that we push back. The reason why I love to come and talk to you all is that because of Steve's testimony, because of all of us working together, I flew back and forth to DC a bunch of times and said, you're gonna kill my region. But a groundswell started to happen because it wasn't just the coast. We started off on Fridays calling New Orleans and saying, what are you guys doing? And we were doing conference calls every Friday. So you want a couple of them. And it started to grow. It was kind of cool. It was Marshfield and Situate, New Orleans, and then on Fridays we get more and more people. We had over 120 different municipalities around the country who all were working hard with the congressman saying we'll hurt people inland. The people who folks who, where's Tornado Alley in the country? Oh, okay. I remember what stood out to me is one of these federal hearings. We had a U.S. senator from Oklahoma saying FEMA. One of the things they eliminated was protection if you have a basement. This still exists, by the way. Basements hurt us, and they said if you have a basement, you're going to pay a lot more money. This U.S. senator from Oklahoma said, "Listen, what do you think we do when we build our homes to try to protect from tornadoes? We all go into the basement, and now you're going to make these rates go up and hurt people." Well, here's the good news on Bigger Waters. It's because of all of your work, all your advocacy, talking to me, talking to other reps, we did have very meaningful changes for that federal act. One of the things that they had, the sales trigger that said the minute you have a home that would be sold, you get the highest insurance cost, it would have croaked every one of you. That was eliminated, and they said, indeed, you can pass your coverage on. When the house gets sold, make sure, and make them in a question, you got to make sure when you're talking to anyone selling their home, if they're deciding whether or not to let their insurance lapse, absolutely make sure. Oh, that triggered 2 calls at once. So people calling you right now, you tell them, keep your flood insurance, because that even if people don't have a mortgage, as you're giving advice to folks, if they're going to sell a home in a year or two, they want to keep that insurance because they can pass it on to whoever buys the home. So that was one change that we did because, Steve, of your advocacy and everyone else here.
Jim, is it always transferable, the insurance?
It is transferable, but yes. So first of all, if you're covered, you can transfer the policy, and what's locked in is the level, if your elevation will be grandfathered. So the most important things are if the home was built and fit the code at that time. Building codes change over time. And that home that was given a $68,000 bill, was because FEMA was saying, hey, your home was built back in the 60s, and now building codes have changed over time. We got them grandfathered, so their bill was appreciably reduced. It sounded like $3,800, because we said that's unfair. They followed all the rules when it was built. So what is grandfathered is whatever the building structure that you did at that time, if you met local building codes, that has some grandfather protection. You can pass your insurance coverage, that can be grandfathered. What isn't grandfathered is the rates do go up, and the rates will continue to go up, depending on how close you are to the ocean. The minimum increase every year is 5%. The maximum increase is supposed to be 18% each and every year until they get to what's called an actuarial rate. And I'll tell you, we keep asking the feds, what does that mean? And nobody knows. Yeah. So, the bad news right now is there's some uncertainty. You hate uncertainty when you're trying to sell a property. I do real estate on the side. We a law firm that no one likes uncertainty, but you cannot promise anyone when you're selling a home. All you can tell them is now, and going through, is that you have the insurance that they had before gets to be passed on. You can lock in the regulations when your house was built at that time, but your rates are going to be going up. Okay. And my sense is we are rewriting, by we, it's the federal government, are rewriting the National Flood Insurance Program in 2017. Hopefully at that time, they're going to give us some certainty. But that's talking about some important things in that new act, by the way, that we got changed. There's also a requirement of an affordability study for Congress to do, to say, how do we keep people in their homes? How do we make sure that people who've never had losses, think of all insurance that's out there. People have never had any losses, and all of a sudden they were told that their rates are going up. Prior to our changes, some people had the rates going up 400%. So they're trying to factor that in, that if you have a lifelong history of the property, right now it doesn't matter, but that is going to be a requirement into 2017. So good news for Haddad's, by the way. Haddad should pay royalties, by the way, because they've been mentioned on the U.S. Senate floor now 2 or 3 times. Every time this comes up, that they're the perfect example of saying someone who followed all the rules, did everything right, and then had their insurance go way up. Their rates have been reduced appreciably well as well. So that was one issue that was hitting us in 2013. The other second part of the punch is the federal government, back when I said after Sandy and the like, they said, we want to redraw all the maps because we want to make sure we're accurately deciding where there is risk. And unfortunately for us in Marshfield Situate, the new law hit at the very same time new maps came in. This is the most direct effect for all of you, because the new maps that came out, you're all Marshfield, Duxbury, Norwell area. I'm not sure where everyone's from. Quincy, okay. Oh, well, I think Quincy will talk about in a second too. The good news for us, the good news, bad news. The bad news is when the maps came out, they were showing floodwaters hitting Marshfield Center, showing 3 feet waves hitting our library in Marshfield Center. Now, I'm a really mild-mannered guy. We hear a lot of things. I always pride myself in want to, intellectually think things through and talk. I was at this first meeting with FEMA when they put it up on a map and they showed 3-foot waves hitting Ventress Library, and I blurted out, I said, "You have to be shitting me." I'm like, listen, I've lived in this town my whole life. I was here for the blizzard of '78. We never had water that came to that level. The standard that these maps are supposed to be done, and this is when you're talking to people who buy a home. The standard is wherever water reached with the blizzard of '78. That was called a 100-year storm. That's where people are at risk. All right. So if people ask you, "Gee, I don't understand this stuff," Steve is right. The first thing you should do is go to town hall or city hall, talk to the town planner, find out where the current maps are. Okay. You are responsible to tell people where the current maps are. I'd submit to you also. You should at least be aware that there are new maps that could be taking effect, and in the case of Marshall and Situate, they're up in the air. Okay, we are working really damn hard to make sure that those maps are done in a scientifically accurate way, because the first maps that came out, 3-foot waves hitting Marshall Center. In Situate, they were showing 4 or 5-foot water being on Front Street, things that we just knew were not accurate. So the good news part is that we raised hell. We were saying this couldn't be accurate. We hired our own experts. The first thing we proved, by the way, through the work of Congressman Keating, was that when they did their analysis, they used the wrong wave analysis. That they used wave analysis that was for the Pacific coast, as opposed to ours, which threw things off. We were showing that they started off with a calculus with the wrong elevation that they thought water would start at as well. So we have just the first maps that came out back in 2013, those we were able to freeze, not only for Marshfield and Situate, but because we raised hell and said they made mistakes, it's been frozen for all of Plymouth County. That, by the way, was a good thing we did in Quincy and not. So a lot of people in Quincy were already been paying. We've saved over 2,000 people in Marshfield and Situate alone, haven't had to pay any flood insurance while these maps are frozen, which I'm really, really proud of. Then a new set of maps just came out back in November. Even those have some problems. So we've been trying to continue to make sure that they're accurate. But you should know, just in this process, from the maps in 2013 to last November, 404 homes in Marshfield alone have dropped out. They're not going to be required to have flood insurance. So here's, for your purposes, one is you should know, the thing that I would feel good about is that we continued through the appeal process. We continue to try to say we want things to be scientifically accurate. We have the data in Marshfield and Situate for where water really reached with the blizzard of 78. So we're trying to use that as a beginning point. And knock on wood, FEMA has been working well, at least to help have those corrections. But we hired a group called the Woods Hole Group down in the Falmouth area that's been helping us to try to correct them.
Excuse me, please. Just a quick question.
Please.
Seeing that all these rates have been frozen while all these tests are conducted, what would happen if we got another Sandy? I mean, this weekend we're supposed to get an astronomical high tide. And I live on the river, so I always pay attention to these kind of things.
Right.
But if we get another Sandy and it hits Massachusetts and it hits Rhode Island, I mean, what are they going to do? I mean, now that they're all the rates are starting to go down to a reasonable, normal level. What if the federal government runs out of money?
Well, the federal government won't run out of money. And first of all, this weekend, if we all lose power, everyone goes to Steve's house. I think that he has a generator. In Sandy, the difficulty is the public policy issue. I get it. I represent 2 coastal towns, and people get annoyed with me, but I keep going and saying, listen, we have a triple threat. We have rising sea levels. It's happening. The level is debatable, but I've lived here my whole life. We do have water in areas that we hadn't before. We have more frequent storms. I've been a rep for 7 years. We've had 5 major storms in those 7 years. It's not my fault. They just keep happening. And
it is your fault.
And the third, though, that I hang my hat on is we have really old infrastructure. And we've been fighting really hard to get money to be repairing seawalls. We've had $14 million just in the last 2 years alone. But we're also but part of our challenge, which it directly affects all of you, is governmental strategies for how we adapt to water coming through. So I'm going to come directly address your thing in one moment, Steve. But what we're doing is public policy. We've seen what the Netherlands, what they do. In the Netherlands, 80% of their country is below sea level. 80%. And we've talked to some of their representatives in the Netherlands. They say, listen, we can't retreat. If we had to retreat and pull back, we'd go into Germany. Right? So they've come up with very sophisticated ways with infrastructure to let water come in and then have it come out and not do damage. So for public policy leaders, those are things we're looking at about how we can do incentives to do what CADADS did, for some property to go up. So look for, there are approximately 9% of the properties that have repetitive loss that are accounting for about 80% of our FEMA claims. So we have to really work on those properties, either lift them up or get them bought out, one way or the other. At some point in time, it's not fair to federal taxpayers to have people over and over and over again having losses. But the majority of people are folks who've never had any kind of thing. So Steve, let me hit your question right on. First of all, our flood insurance, the whole program is based upon a 100-year storm, which is a blizzard of 78. Sandy is entirely different, and it's so that we cannot insure everybody for a Sandy because of the astronomical cost of it for our folks. So if another Sandy happened, we would go back to the federal government for reserves. I think long term, as we have climate change, we're going to have a new kind of policy in the federal government that says what do you have out in California? You have mudslides and you have fires. Mississippi River, they have a lot of flooding. We're subject to different kinds. We're going to need more of a national policy that is just a disaster policy that everyone pays a little bit in. The problem of the flood insurance program, we only have 5 million people that pay in, And as these regulations get tougher, if someone owns the home outright, you guys are going to have a lot of people who are selling the homes because they want to downsize. And the hardest conversation you're going to have with those folks is if you own your home outright without a mortgage, you don't have to pay flood insurance. Flood insurance only applies to properties that are underwritten that have Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, right? So the hardest part is to talk to someone who's an elder who says, you know what, I don't want to afford these rates. I've already paid my home off. I'm not going to get flood insurance. And if they do that, it's going to be very hard to sell that home down the line because they are going to go to a higher actuarial rate. So let me touch on a couple other points for people who are going to be. So your first thing, Steve, the first thing is if you have any property, I don't care where it is now. We have properties in Rockton that had sales fall through because they were next to a river. First thing you do when you're going to sell a property, go down to Town Hall. In Marshfield, we put the maps online. You can actually, with some certainty, you can see areas that could be along the line. If you're not certain, go to Town Hall, have them tell you whether it's in or out. That's the first thing. For people, if they are getting added to a map for the first time ever, the good news for them is that there is a program that we have, and by we, it's the federal government. They want people to get a preferred rate plan. They want to bolster numbers of people coming in. Those can be as little as $250, $300 a year. The maximum we've seen for some folks is like $400. So you should tell people if someone says, "Oh my God, I have to sell my home, but I just got added to this flood zone." The world's not over. We say, sign up for a preferred rate. It's a PRP, preferred rate plan. It's supposed to lock them in for those 3 years at that rate. And even when they go up now, that 5%, if they're far inland, 18% if they're closer. Most people close to the water are already in the flood zones. But those increases only apply to the preferred rate plan. So that helps. We will get more certainty from the federal government as we reauthorize this act in 2017. That should make your lives better. It should make my life better as an advocate for our coastal towns. Make sure if people are trying to sell the home, you guys all already know about elevation certificates, right? I'm sure everyone knows. So make sure if someone's to sell a home, the first thing they should do, pay to get an elevation certificate, because it could very well be, even if they're in a flood zone, their particular home might be out of it. Because they might be beyond at one point. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just had a question. I thought in order to get that preferred rate, you had to have the insurance prior to the approval of the maps.
That is true. So the question is for folks. The question was to get the preferred rate plan, you have to have insurance prior to the new maps. That is true. The good news for us in Marshfield and Scituate, Plymouth County, is the new maps haven't taken effect yet. And I'm glad. Thank you for the question, because right now, for Marshfield and Scituate, we're still working with FEMA to get those maps right, trying to have them scientifically accurate. Once FEMA thinks they're right, they're going to do what's called a letter of final determination. That was supposed to happen in January. We got them to delay. Right? Whenever that letter comes out, we then have 6 months to act to be able to adopt the new maps, and that's to go to town meeting. Town meeting has to vote it. So I'll make sure to let Steve know. We can email everybody when that letter of final determination comes out. That is a trigger when people should say, okay, these maps are out. Let's go find out my property is in. And you definitely have, within that 6 months, you better buy the preferred rate plan. You better get your insurance at that point. But it is a great point. So you have to have the insurance prior to the new maps taking effect.
But if you're like in Quincy, you're sort of out of luck.
If you're in Quincy, I'm not as proficient for Quincy, but we are in a better position because we appealed. If you're in Quincy, they're doing what are called letter of map appeals and for reviews. So the maps are already done there. People who are already in the zone there, the first thing they should do, if you have a Quincy home that you're trying to sell, same process, get a elevation certificate to find out whether that person, whether their specific home is in or not. They can appeal that determination if they feel that they're in an area incorrectly. They can appeal a whole zone too. It's just a little bit more costly. And in Quincy, the city government there, I think, realized they kind of messed up a bit. So they've been paying for a lot of these regional reviews and appeals.
Giving an elevation certificate in that you get worse for you.
Well, if it does, you keep it to yourself. But you ought to have it though. Just that's and then there are people, there are experts who could tell people, for instance, with basements, tough decision for when you're looking to sell a home. We're helping a person, and Steve, because I think you were doing a listing, that there's some difficult decisions, but you can save a lot of money on flood insurance if you elevate, even not just your home. Elevating a home is expensive. In some cases, it is the right thing to do, and the federal government can pay up to 85% for some of these serious repetitive loss properties. But what's more realistic for a lot of homes is just get the utilities out of the basement and just be able to put them up. We've changed bylaws in Marshfield to allow, even if homes are kind of close to one another, we change our zoning to allow what's called a bump out, where normally you would be able to do an addition that would get closer to your neighbor. We change zoning to say, well, you can do that if you're just going to be doing a bump out where you're adding on a floor, and it's where you're going to be putting any of your utilities, moving them up. That saves a lot of money, and that doesn't cost as much. We had one person, again, home, good sized home. They're going to pay their bill's going to be like $4,000 or $5,000 a year. They had never seen water before, and for $9,000, we got them to move their utilities up. So in a 2-year period of time, that's paying for itself. And when they're doing that, they upgraded the utilities too, so it actually made the property more valuable. Yeah, there's so many breakaway issues. What the hardest part are, when they're crawl spaces, those are easy because you can fill in crawl spaces and move things up. When you have full basements, it's harder. But I do know people that have just decided that it's not worth the cost, and that they're filling in the basement.
Jim, there's a lot of people that are on fixed incomes,
yes,
senior citizens,
mm-hmm.
and $400 a year or whatever it is doesn't sound like a lot.
Right.
But to them, that they're going to complain.
Understand.
And is there anything that the federal government has in mind for people that are on fixed income and senior citizens that kind of a reduced rate?
Yeah, Steve's question, if you couldn't hear it, is what do we do for senior citizens? That Steve, the question was saying, $400 a year doesn't sound like a lot, but for someone on a fixed income, it certainly is. I can tell you what we do locally first, because I'm more familiar with that. In Marshfield, if you're a senior over 65, you can pay 0 property taxes outright. You can defer. This is something, any senior that you have that is of course, it would be more so, I guess, if someone's trying to stay in their home. But in Marshfield, for someone staying in their home, they can defer the taxes 0% interest. But the state law says you can collect up to 8% interest for this program. We passed it and said 0%. So for a senior to stay in their home, they don't have to pay any property taxes at all. And then when they pass or they want to sell the property, then they pay a month, they pay the property taxes, but it's at 0%. So that's one thing with them. Locally too, we allow folks, there's an income eligibility for the second program. First one, there isn't, you can do it outright. Second one, you can work off taxes by volunteering down at town hall. And you can work off, the amount's gone up. It used to be $500. I think it's up to $800 a year. Your question, but for the federal government, there really should be, we're looking at what other ways now, this is state and federal trying to collaborate, saying, how do we make these things affordable? That's why I mentioned the study, there's an affordability study. As soon as there's a second round of this coming out, we'll share it, because they're coming up with thoughts saying, how do we subsidize by income? Do we subsidize people so that we don't have a widespread loss of value for properties along any place that there's water? Because the statistic is staggering how many people in our country live close to either a river or to the ocean. And it makes sense, because when towns were building up, that used to be a way for transportation, and it certainly was a way for some of our earliest recorded roads in Massachusetts. We used the beach. So does that answer your question? But that's what we do locally for sure, Steve. And then federal government, that we're looking at it. State government says it's such a huge cost that we're kind of letting the feds find ways to subsidize.
Okay.
By the way, the premiums, if people are going to lift their homes, the money that comes through that comes entirely from premiums that are paid from the National Flood Insurance Program. It's not us taxpayers paying that. It's an important thing. Anyone who's in a flood area, I'd be happy to share the FEMA sites where people can look into ways they can be able to try to reduce their risk. There will be a much greater emphasis. I think what the federal government did with Bigger Waters was really punitive. I get it that we had to make up for a deficit. But the idea is we're just taking 5 million people out there and wrapping all the costs on them. It wasn't a very good policy, because a whole bunch of people fell out. They said, we're not paying it. Either one, we can't afford it, or two, if we paid off a mortgage, we're not going to participate anymore. So it was counterproductive. Now we're looking for policies that can encourage people to reduce their risk and try to leverage federal and state monies. Well, any other questions? Please.
I have a house listing in Hull,
Okay.
at the very end.
Mhm.
It's right on the seawall.
Mhm.
And I know that they used to pay flood insurance, but their house is paid off and they don't pay it.
Okay.
So they have an elevation certificate and it's below what it should be.
Okay.
And they said years ago, when they were gonna raise their house, that they could get a grant for it.
Yeah.
So would that still exist?
It would exist, but they have to be participating. In order to get the grant, that they have to be participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. Because, just as I mentioned, that anyone that wants to raise a home, they can apply, and they should, first thing, have them talk in Hull. The actual planner for Hull is a Marshall resident. There's a memory at the moment, but they should go to the planning board and see where they're at for their applications. And so that's number one, but they should get back into the NFIP process.
I think
They
it
should
was so long ago that they did all this,
Mhm.
because it was like after 78.
Okay,
And now parents have died and it's the two sons that just want to sell the house.
okay.
And they don't want to pay the insurance because it's a mortgage.
Right, I understand. So, and that will be on the market. Some folks they'll have to decide when someone goes to buy it, they are going to get a little bit less, because people are going to say now they should get a quote for what it would cost right now to get the flood insurance. So when they're marketing the property, they can say, we don't have it, but this is what we're told it will be. So they should do that. If it's astronomical, they should decide what they want, because it's easier to get your policy and then pass it on to a buyer than it is for the uncertainty for a buyer saying, this is what we think it'll be. So at the very least, they ought to get a quote.
Jim, let me comment on that for a second.
Yeah.
If you don't know what it's gonna cost for the insurance, you are never gonna be able to sell that house.
I know.
You have got to have a quote from a reputable insurance company. You put it right in MLS. I've got a house on St. Clair, a short sale in Braintree that I've had a lot of troubles with. And I got a quote from an insurance company in Norwell. It was like $1,674 for the insurance. But prior to that, every time I'd say to somebody, well, you're gonna need flood insurance, just contact your flood insurance. Your insurance carrier. They'd be like, yeah, we're gonna pass. You've gotta do the legwork and you've gotta post what it's gonna cost. Because they are never gonna do it. And in their mind, they're gonna be thinking, it's gonna cost $10,000, forget it.
And Steve, there's a big asterisk on that too, that you can't guarantee it.
Well, you can guarantee it if the insurance company has quoted and in the policy at X amount per year, you can't guarantee it 5 years from now, but you can guarantee it in 2016 what it's gonna cost.
You can't guarantee the accuracy of the insurance company.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
switched at the last second. Ask Andrea how that happened.
Because the elevation certificate's being correct either. And that was just one isolated case.
So I'm not sure if as it's being recorded, it's just that the issue, and Steve, was to your point on Hull, or any property being sold, the biggest drag on real estate, it's the same thing in financial world, that we don't like uncertainty. And I think that's great advice. And what Steve was just saying, if you're going to sell a home, any home, if it's in a flood area, and the person doesn't already have insurance coverage, you ought to get a quote. If they do have insurance coverage, you should have that part of your package too, saying here's your existing insurance, and the changes that were done to federal law say that can be passed on to you, with your asterisks of saying we can't promise you. We just say this is what it is right now. This is what you have. This is what federal government said that can be passed on. It is subject to some increases, but the other there's a thing called dicta whenever you hear in legal cases where they say it's persuasive authority. It's not a promise, but the federal government, what they wrote in for this is they said they never want flood insurance premiums for properties, or the goal is not to have them be more than 1% of the value of the property itself. Now that I can already tell you, it doesn't apply to some homes right on the water, because I've had people have $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 bills for bigger homes. But their goal for this affordability study is to give people some kind of idea of what will actuarial rates be, and when will it finally end. And they said a goal of their study was to make sure that for properties that aren't serious repetitive loss, properties that haven't had claims before, that their goal was to try to cap the exposure to being 1% of the value of the home. That is a goal. And I hope when they're getting this redone in 2017 that they can meet that so that you have some certainty, I have some certainty. I want to be the biggest cheerleader for Marshall and Situate, and I want people coming to our towns. And this has been the biggest challenge that we've had. So,
You know, we represent as many buyers as we do sellers.
okay.
And, you know, I think we all want to do right by our buyers. You know, if we sell them a house in a floodplain zone, we want to be able to say, you know, it might go up, but I mean, how do we advise people? What do we say to people when they buy something that's going to cost them $1,600 or $2,000 a year? Where do we say the cutoff is going to be, and what is our exposure liability-wise if it starts to go up more than we, you know, I mean, we're not going to quote, but
Right.
do we have some exposure there?
I think if you're very clear about as far as your exposure when your buyer's coming and buying a home, and you know, you trying not to dissuade them, but in the same respect, making sure that they have their eyes open. So I guess in your packet, you'd want to have one things that I can help provide you, Steve, that would show this is what Bigot Waters got changed. So even with the language that they in the new act that said their goal is to have 1%, and again, that's a goal. The other though is people should know the law says you can pass on your coverage, so you at least you'll know what it will be for next year, and then the increases it's going to go up. Right? But the increases are supposed to be between 5% and 18% a year. So that you can outright tell them. That's
18% is a lot.
it is a lot, yeah.
But 18 with no cap.
Well,
Until they get to what the actuary rate, which we don't know what it is yet.
and that's the problem. We always come back to saying, listen, can you tell us what the actual rate will be? Because it will be a drag on our communities for some time. That is the biggest ask we have of them for 2017 is define what that is. What they've told us is what their goal is. The goal is that it will be 1% of the value of a home. Okay, but I already know that doesn't apply to some homes. So what you, I guess if I were the person, if I'm talking to my buyer saying, when you make the offer, part of your offer is going to factor in that you know you're going to have these increases because we know that will happen. And over the next couple of years, until we get certainty from the federal government, it looks like it could be 5%, could be 18%. But their language says once a program is solvent, that was their issue, is if they're seeing that their ratepayers, what's coming in every year is not going out, there's less pressure. And I can tell you, by the way, in Massachusetts, we already pay more than we take out already. So that's what my fight is with them about saying, give us a definition so we can give people an idea of what their maximum exposure will be.
Because the uncertainty, I mean, when I had that property up in Braintree,
Yes, yeah.
I had party after party after party saying, okay, almost stepping up to the plate to buy it. And then they got scared about the floodplain.
Right.
And they backed out or they changed their mind. And, you know, I've heard that time and time again about properties all over the South Shore where they're like, oh, it's a floodplain zone, forget it. Because they don't even want to deal with it. They don't even want to think about it.
Right.
That's the uncertainty, I think. is
Yeah.
what's getting-
No, it is, Glenn. No, that's true, Glenn.
17 will hopefully tighten water up. I have a technical question about the maps.
Please.
Are they gonna, the maps have been pulled back effectively, is that right?
That's correct, Glenn.
The Woods Hole group had different methodologies.
Yes.
Will FEMA use that across all of the mapping, or just because they used transects before?
Right.
Are they gonna use, because it was proven that almost every single transect had the Woods Hole methodology was right. Are they gonna use that across the map?
So Glenn's question is about, what's that?
It's kind of technical.
No, but it's getting right to the weeds of it, is when we did our appeal, we had so little time. So when we hired two experts, and what they did is they picked, there are things called transects that when they're figuring how waves would hit different, each region of Marshall Situate there are different transects. I think there are 13 that we tried to appeal in Marshall alone. There were 7 or 8 in Situate. So the answer is that they have accepted the fact that the methodology of Woods Hole Group is a preferred and more scientifically accurate methodology because we got right into the weeds of things. And because we had data going back to 1978 from our planning departments. All I can tell you is right now, the best news is that they pulled back even the second version. First version of the maps we thought were ridiculous. Second version have been better. And we're showing that they're getting more accurate, but there were still sections of Marshall and Situate that were far off. So they pulled those back, and they are working collaboratively right now with Woods Hole Group to try to perfect them, and they are using their methodology. So knock on wood, when the maps come out. By the way, the nightmare scenario for a policy person is that when these maps, the question about the letter of final determination. So when that comes out, we know we have 6 months to accept them. Then you have to go to town meeting to vote them. We were going to have to stand at town meeting and say, you got to vote these maps in, because if we don't, we lose all of the rates for flood insurance. If we don't, we lose every time there's a major storm, we get monies back, we lose those. We lose the grant fund. So we would have had to vote them in, even though we knew there were errors. And that would have been the gun to our head. Yeah. And I was not looking forward to that, because I'm one of the biggest critics of the way it was done, but I was going to have to go to town meeting and say, folks, even though I don't think they're, so I'm feeling a lot better about the process, seeing that our expert that we keep hearing reports back from, is they're having routine contact. They are being very specific of each region of Marshall and Situate. For other towns, this is a tale, and this is why I'm really proud of Marshall and Situate, because other places haven't done that. They'll have a gun to their head. They're going to vote.
They're stuck with them.
They're stuck with it. So and they can. Well, in fairness, at any time, even when the maps are accepted, at any time, an individual homeowner can do a letter of map appeal. A town can do a letter of map revision. So if you pay for the scientific work, you can get them perfected. Yeah, please.
So just for clarification, so if you're listing a home in Marshall or Situate, we have the old existing maps, you can go down to town hall and figure it out, but
Yes.
that home may or may not be in, well, if it was in a flood zone, the board probably still would be.
That's most likely, yes.
Most likely. So if you have a new home that's close to a flood zone on the old maps, there's a good possibility it will be in a flood zone moving forward. So is there some ambiguity?
Yeah.
You go list a home in Plymouth, if it's in a flood zone, if they're in the new maps that they've adopted, even though I thought you said it had been postponed.
Because of our appeals, it's been frozen for all of Plymouth, all of Plymouth County. So here's what I'd suggest, is you should go, when you're having a home, any of these towns, see what the existing maps require, find out what the new maps, because, again, we want certainty. So if you can go to someone and say, look, you're one on the existing map and you're not on the future one either, so you're pretty safe. And that for your liability purposes, you can say, here they both are, you are not in the flood zone, period.
But they pull them back again, so there may be even more changes.
Yeah, and I will tell you, the changes have been for the better. So so if people are right on the line, this is hard, because we had a forum you had to come like a year or two ago, Steve, and I was saying, look, I can tell you right now, if you live in Kent Park or Marshall, you're going to drop out. We knew different areas. If you lived across from the police station, most of that should drop out. And I was saying that, I'm not the expert, but I just, from the people that were advising us, I think that's going to happen. That did happen for those two areas. But we still have downtown Marshall, by the way, still has the same thing, still has the same prediction that on one side of 139, which would be the side for CDS, they're elevation 9 or 10, I want to say. Let me get this right. No, this could be 11. And then on the other side, it's elevation 14. So they're acting as if the roadway is going to somehow make water big 3-foot difference. So we know that's just not accurate. But for everybody here, I don't want to confuse you have an existing map, so that's crystal clear. People who are in the map right now, they're going to be in the future. Then you have the newly revised maps of November. If people put in those maps, you'd have to tell them right now, be aware. You're not in there now, but it looks like you could come. The only thing you could say to people is that the town is continuing to appeal, and the maps will be more scientifically accurate. Even if you're in a flood zone, your level hopefully is going to drop, so you'll be paying less for flood insurance.
I'm very interested in here going over, like Blueberry Road, Marshall, down public and stuff.
Yes, yeah.
Where the 50% assessed value rule kicked in.
Okay.
Where there was a floodplain, where now I have to go look at the assessor's value of the property. And if repairing it was going to cost more than 50% of what the assessor's department said the house was worth, then essentially the property is totaled. You basically have to tear it down and elevate it, and then build to whatever you're supposed to be now, and that's how I have to market it, right? So the Marshfield residents are obviously very upset, because it's like this value dropped by 50%.
Right.
Is there anything for him, or is it just kind of
yeah, for public policy reasons, if they're going to put that kind of money, we want to reduce we want to reduce claims, we want to reduce risk. So if they're going to put the money in to do more than 50% repair overall, the new guideline, our town building requirements where you have to be a minimum elevation of 11. We do have a bunch of properties, people's homes in town that are at 9. That's not good policy long term. So if for that gentleman, he should try to come up with some strategies not to do, not to do more than the 50%.
It's one of those, and here's what made me think of it.
Yeah.
There are so many houses like that in Marshall.
Yes,
Like
yeah.
Beach, that there's
Yeah.
these little cottages.
I understand.
That when you look at the assessed value, they're like 50 grand in building cottages.
Right.
So if you have to side it, put a roof on,
Right.
it's total, basically.
Yeah, and
Does he have
here's,
flood insurance now?
No, it was a
oh,
family property for decades.
yeah.
So my advice has been, look, we just have to take our punches. It's basically worth what the lot is.
Yeah. So he's got a lot of land, and then depending on a few things, he is in a better situation. If he does meet after Blizzard of '78, we rewrote all of our building guidelines saying, listen, we got to be at minimum elevation 11 for new construction.
And there is some, it's smart in one way because the house definitely needs flooding.
Yeah, okay.
So why
Yeah,
rebuild it?
that's and we just can't sustain the program if we keep allowing the same thing to happen.
But it made me think though, how many houses in Marshfield are like that people don't even know it yet?
Yeah.
That their houses are all totaled. I mean, there's gonna be like 800 of them.
In the entire country, there are a lot of properties that same way, and when our homes, when they were built, one of the great things about Marshfield is how we have changed in a good way, that we have had people come down and take the old summer rentals or the like and put some money into them, make them year round. But we just have to make sure, in his case, I'm sad to say, I think the reality is for them that he inherited something, he's lost some value, but whatever he does there, either sell it as the lot as is and let someone do it, or he should build something and make it be at the current zoning requirements.
It's really the only advice you can give them. It's the way it is.
Yeah. Right. And by the way, if he's going to go to that expense, I would do what Haddad did and go a little bit above what the requirements are, because then that property is golden for a long time. And you will, over time, you get some money. There's a woman who was on our advisory committee, Doris Crary, owns properties in Marshall and Situate, and she's someone. Make a little bit. I'll get you her contact too. She's a very good person talking about how the money that you get back by putting some funds into Elevate and take advantage of these grant programs. She's done it. She owns like 6 properties and she's elevated 4 of them. But she said she's got the money.
I've been noticing that all over the place in Marshfield, that people are bringing their homes up.
Right.
Are there some kind of federal grants or
Yes.
programs that allow that?
Yes.
But how much could those be? I mean, it's a huge project.
We I can tell you, and we've already done it in Situate. There are, I want to say over 30 homes in there and we're going through it. We're doing a bunch of stuff. Situate hired a full-time staff person who this is her sole job is to work on these grants and to the community rating system. If you do things that we're talking about, having new building code and looking for ways to adapt to water coming in and out, you can save people on their flood insurance a minimum of 10% a year. It can be up to 40%. The more, that's why I'm putting a lot of money. We're arguing the seawalls that we're putting into reduces a risk of some flooding and damage. So we want the government to look at those to give us lower rates. The quick thing is there are grants. They are super competitive, but they're paid through this. It's not our tax money. It's through people's premiums. So,
Are the grants for commercial as well?
I don't know. I think the grants are more so for residential, but Small Business Administration has very low interest loans that I know of commercial properties that took advantage of those to make improvements to save funds.
You mentioned earlier about the government stepping into repetitive loss properties and buying them.
Yeah.
In this case, is there a process what's the process to go through to get the government to buy the house?
We just had it done in Marshfield at town meeting voted it down. But the process, now this is going to stretch my knowledge a little bit, but Greg Guimond, a town planner, said we know they can identify the serious repetitive loss properties. So we had a public meeting where we said, if you are one of these serious repetitive loss properties, you can qualify, the government will buy your home out. One of the people said, we're for it. It was the same kind of thing. It was a home that they inherited that was probably going to, going to need some real money to put into it.
Is that the King Road property?
I don't know which one it was. I just remember there was controversy. There was controversy about it. People said that, yeah. So that's the process. At town meeting, possibly could have been presented better to explain to people why, that was a good use of federal. It wasn't going to cost the town anything. It was federal tax dollars. And it was going to allow, we really have to get very thoughtful about how we're going to allow in certain areas of water to come in and how we can direct it so it comes back out, which will mean in some areas it will be buying property out. What has changed, by the way, when I first came into office, we would talk about that. People said, hell no, how dare the federal government or any government talk about buying my home? I'm staying here forever. After all these different storms, there's some people saying, you know what, it's maybe not a bad idea. I would prefer for tax base and other quality of life, I'd prefer to put the money in to help elevate homes and try to deal with the water that way and infrastructure. But there are some properties, we got to tell the folks saying, listen, there are a couple of properties in Situate that have had over $1 million in government money, repetitive losses. At some point, we have to say, you know what, government can't do that. You're going to be on your own. I'm asking the Fed, I think what they should do is have a program where they buy out a life interest in the property, saying you can stay in that property, we're going to give you X amount now, but to try to have an area right along the coast that we can do. How many of you know Wrexham Beach? Think of Wrexham Beach is just by having that area, that is exactly what we want to try to get in different areas that will over time will protect us. We do more. We have seawalls are good. We can do try to change policies too to allow us to put more sand on the beaches. There's a lot of interesting work, and it's difficult because everything needs permitting. In Florida, they have these ships they put off the coast. They suck up sand, and then just put it right up on the beach. That would reduce a lot of the damage. We're not being allowed to do that yet. So
That town meeting request, by the way, was turned down.
I know it was. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe could have been presented a little bit better.
Clovers.
What's that?
Those clovers.
Yeah. A couple more questions.
On a sidebar, just
Yeah.
was curious, with all these people potentially raising their homes, has there been some especially in Situate, pushback with the neighbors? Oh my God, you're blocking my view. Blah, blah, blah.
To talk about the complexities, by the way, if you talk to the fire department, now they're saying, wait a second, we have to change our zoning. As you all know, you can't go more than 35 feet high is our zoning in our town. So we've had to change those to allow, if people are going to elevate, they're going to go a little bit higher. So that has some ramifications for fire departments and the like. Absolutely have some people saying you're blocking views. We're balancing the different issues.
So can they raise their house? They
Yeah.
have to raise their house,
Yeah.
but now the neighbors are suing them because.
You know what? If this neighbor's going to sue, they'd have to sue on the zoning that said you can't go more than 35 feet high, and our towns are now allowing for that. And there will be, it aesthetically is going to be a challenge for us because we're going to have some homes up higher than others and the like. But I think right along the coast, we're going to have to. We are going to have to be doing that more and more over time. But last question, then.
I'm selling a home in Canton,
Okay.
and I am working as a buyer's agent. Do you recommend we need to go to the town hall, consult with the insurance company? I contacted the insurance company, they said that we were going back to the insurance for now. Is that good enough, or do you need to go to the town hall?
Let's see. I would suggest, if you already have the insurance saying it's an X zone, but I would go belt and suspenders. It take a few minutes just to be a town hall. So for your buyer, for your client,
But she's representing the seller in this case.
you're representing the buyer. Yeah. I would want, if I'm representing the buyer, I'd want the belt and suspenders.
The town hall has the most updated
They do.
information, right?
They do.
I would send the buyer down to town hall themselves and say, look, this is something that you need to investigate fully before you jump in.
Yes.
Because, when you go down there, if you make a mistake, it's your mistake and they're going to call you on it. So when they go down, they own it. So you have to be very, very careful about, especially if you're representing a buyer in a transaction. If you're representing a seller in a transaction, then you make no representations. Okay? You say it's not in a floodplain zone right now, but we have something on the purchase and sales agreement that says that just because it's not in a floodplain zone right now doesn't mean that it couldn't be in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. So again, you've got to, the emphasis has got to be on the buyer to and their attorney, if they have one, to do their due diligence. So thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. All right, before